The grand halls of the Galactic Council chamber were filled with the quiet hum of alien whispers. Representatives from dozens of planets had gathered. Their faces and forms varied, some with scales, others with fur, and a few even glowed softly in the dim light. In the center, at a raised podium, Counselor Zarkin stood tall, his reptilian eyes scanning the room. The atmosphere was tense, as if the air itself was waiting to hear what he would say. It has become clear that humanity's rapid expansion must be controlled. Zarkin began, his voice smooth but firm. Their actions have disturbed the balance of our galaxy. Therefore, the Council has decided a ban on all human starships traveling beyond their solar system. A wave of murmurs swept across the chamber, some voices curious, others doubtful. But no one dared to oppose the decision openly. At the far end of the room, Ambassador Jessica Warren stood up. She was Earth's representative, and all eyes turned to her. Her posture was rigid, her hands clenched tightly at her sides, but her voice was calm and composed. "We have followed every rule set by this council," Jessica said, her eyes locking onto Zarkin's. "We have respected your laws, even when they were unfair. But this decision, it is unjust. You have no right to cage us in our own home." Counselor Zarkin's lips curled into a sly smile. "No right. Perhaps it is time humanity learned its place in the galaxy," he sneered. With a wave of his hand, a massive holoscreen flickered to life, showing a scene from a distant mining colony. Human workers were being rounded up, surrounded by heavily armed council enforcers. Some of them were forced to their knees, while others were led away in chains. Jessica's heart sank as she recognized the faces of the captives. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and fear. "These people are innocent. Why are they being treated like criminals?" Zarkin didn't even flinch. "They violated council regulations," he said coolly. "Unauthorized mining in restricted zones. This is how we maintain order, Ambassador Warren." "Order?" Jessica's voice rose, sharp with disbelief. "This isn't order, it's oppression. And humanity will not stand by while our people are treated this way." The chamber erupted into noise, some representatives whispering in agreement, others shaking their heads. Zarkin raised his hand, and the room fell silent again. "The Council's decision is final," he declared. "From this day forward, humanity's ships will remain within their own solar system. If any vessel is caught breaching this restriction, it will be destroyed." Jessica felt a chill run down her spine. She wanted to scream, to argue, but she knew it would be useless. The Council had already made up its mind. She took a deep breath and stared at Zarkin, her eyes burning with defiance. "You may think you have control, Counselor, but you have no idea what you've just unleashed." Zarkin's smile widened, but it was cold like the edge of a blade. "We shall see." Back on Earth, the news spread faster than wildfire. Across cities, in the countryside, and on distant outposts orbiting around Saturn, people gathered around screens, watching the footage from the council chamber. The images of their fellow humans, humiliated and chained, ignited a fire within them. For decades, humanity had worked hard to prove themselves to the galactic community, sharing knowledge, trading resources, and abiding by strict laws. And now, despite all their efforts, they were being treated like criminals. In a hidden underground facility beneath the Rocky Mountains, Captain Elias Trent watched the broadcast on a large screen. His jaw was set, and his hands were clenched so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. "They think they can just push us around like this," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. Beside him, Commander Lee, a tall woman with sharp eyes, nodded. "They've underestimated us, Captain. They always have. But we've been preparing for this day." Captain Trent's eyes flickered to her, and a slow smile spread across his face. "Yes, we have." The two of them walked down a long, dimly lit corridor, their footsteps echoing off the metal walls. They approached a massive steel door, guarded by two soldiers in dark uniforms. The soldiers stepped aside, and Trent pressed his hand against a biometric scanner. The door hissed and slid open, revealing a sight that would have stunned anyone from the council. Inside, there were rows upon rows of starships, their sleek black hulls gleaming under the fluorescent lights. These weren't the commercial ships the council was used to seeing. These were warships, bristling with weapons. Each one was equipped with the most advanced technology Earth had secretly developed over the past few decades. Humanity had hidden their true power, playing the role of a peaceful, cooperative species, while quietly preparing for a moment just like this. Commander Lee walked up to one of the ships, her hand resting on its cold metal surface. "The fleet is ready," she said. "We've kept them hidden. And now it's time to show the galaxy what we're capable of." Captain Trent nodded. "Good. Because this isn't just about revenge. This is about survival. They want to cage us, but they have no idea what kind of beast they're cornering." He turned to face the rows of ships, his voice growing louder, more confident. "Signal the fleet. We launch at dawn." As the sun began to rise over the Earth, the hidden silos across the planet opened. One by one, the dark warships lifted off, cutting through the sky like silent predators. The Eternal Resolve, the flagship, led the charge, its engines roaring as it broke through the atmosphere. From the farthest reaches of Earth's orbit, space stations and satellite arrays recorded the sight, transmitting it across the planet. Inside the command center of the Eternal Resolve, Captain Trent addressed his crew, his voice calm but filled with a steely determination. "Today, we send a message to the Galactic Council. They thought they could cage us, but they were wrong. We're not just fighting for our freedom. We're fighting for every man, woman, and child who dreams of exploring the stars. And today, we show them that humanity is not to be underestimated." The fleet of Earth's most powerful ships gathered, engines humming, ready to jump into hyperspace. And as they prepared to make the leap, every person on board knew one thing for sure. They weren't just defending Earth. They were fighting for the right to exist freely among the stars, and they would not stop until that right was secured. The countdown began. The engines flared. And then, in a flash of light, humanity's fleet disappeared into the void, ready to face whatever awaited them on the other side. The reawakening. The vastness of space was silent, but on the dark side of Earth, there was movement. Deep within the planet's hidden bunkers and secret bases, the preparations were coming to life. In a concealed facility beneath the Rocky Mountains, hundreds of personnel moved with purpose, their faces grim yet determined. They were about to do something that had been decades in the making. Captain Elias Trent stood at the heart of this activity, his gaze fixed on a massive screen displaying the Galactic Council's emblem. The Council's decree had been clear. Humanity was forbidden from leaving their solar system, cut off from the rest of the galaxy. But Earth had been planning for this. They had seen the Council's arrogance long ago and knew this day might come. "Captain," Commander Lee said, approaching him with a datapad in hand, "all systems are green. The fleet is ready for deployment." Her voice was calm, but there was a spark of excitement in her eyes. This was what they had been training for, preparing for, ever since the Council began to tighten its grip on humanity. Captain Trent nodded, his expression unreadable. "Good. Initiate the launch sequence. I want all ships to be airborne within the hour." As the orders were relayed, Trent and Lee walked through the facility, passing by soldiers in dark uniforms checking their weapons, technicians running final diagnostics on ship systems, and engineers ensuring that every piece of equipment was in perfect condition. The underground base was a maze of corridors and hangars, and it buzzed with activity. They reached a viewing platform that overlooked the largest hangar in the facility. Below, the flagship of Earth's hidden fleet, the Eternal Resolve, was being prepped for launch. It was a magnificent sight, sleek, dark, and bristling with advanced weaponry. Its angular design made it look like a predator, ready to strike. The ship had been kept secret, just like the rest of the fleet, hidden from prying eyes to avoid drawing the Council's suspicion. Commander Lee glanced at Trent. "Do you think the Council has any idea what's coming?" Trent allowed a slight smile. Not a clue. They've underestimated us from the beginning, and it will be their downfall. The Eternal Resolve was one of hundreds of ships that had been constructed in secret. Humanity had hidden its true strength, playing the part of a cooperative, subdued species while preparing for the day they would have to fight back. Each ship was equipped with Earth's most advanced technology, from stealth systems to powerful energy cannons. The Council had no idea what humanity had been working on, and that was their greatest advantage. "Captain," a voice crackled over the intercom, "this is Control. The fleet is assembled and ready for your orders." Captain Trent stepped forward, gripping the railing as he looked down at the Eternal Resolve. "This is it," he said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of the moment. "Send the signal to all ships. We launch at dawn." As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, the hidden launch silos across Earth opened. It was a sight unlike anything seen before. Dark, sleek starships emerging from their underground bunkers, engines roaring to life as they took to the skies. From all over the planet, the fleet rose, each ship lifting off in a coordinated dance of steel and fire. The Eternal Resolve led the charge, its engines burning bright as it soared upward, piercing through the atmosphere and into the void of space. Inside the command center of the Eternal Resolve, Captain Trent took his seat. The bridge was a hive of activity, with officers monitoring systems, communications, and navigation. Screens displayed tactical data, maps, and fleet movements. This was more than just a mission. It was a statement. Humanity would not be caged. "All ships, report in," Trent ordered, his eyes focused on the holographic display showing the fleet's formation. One by one, the voices of ship commanders filled the bridge, confirming their status. "This is Vanguard 1, all systems operational. This is Shadowlance, ready for action. This is Ironclad, standing by." The list went on, and with each confirmation, the fleet's presence solidified, a force to be reckoned with. Commander Lee stood beside Trent, her hands clasped behind her back. "It's been a long time coming," she said quietly. "Do you think we're ready for what's ahead?" Trent didn't hesitate. "We've been ready for years. The Council thinks they can keep us isolated, but they've forgotten who we are. We're explorers, pioneers, warriors. They pushed us into a corner, and now we're pushing back." The Eternal Resolve and its fleet gathered in orbit, forming a tight formation. The ships were designed not just for battle but for stealth. Each one was equipped with a cloaking system that would allow them to move through space undetected, at least until they decided to make their presence known. It was humanity's ace in the hole, a surprise waiting to be unleashed. Far across the galaxy, at the Galactic Council's headquarters on Unity Prime, the mood was very different. Inside the grand, opulent halls, Councilor Zarkan was lounging in his office, a glass of sparkling blue liquid in his hand. He was reviewing reports when an alert flashed on his desk console. "Counselor," said an aide, his voice strained, "we have detected unusual activity on the outskirts of Earth's solar system. It appears they're mobilizing ships." Zarkan's brow furrowed, but he quickly waved his hand dismissively. "Let them. What can they do? They're confined to their own system. The Council will crush any attempt they make to defy us." He took a sip of his drink, savoring the taste, confident in the Council's power. But back on the Eternal Resolve, Captain Trent had other plans. "Engage the cloaking fields," he commanded, his eyes fixed on the screen ahead. "Plot a course for Unity Prime. We're going to show the Council exactly who they're dealing with." With a hum, the fleet's cloaking systems activated, and the ships began to shimmer, fading out of sight. They were invisible to the naked eye and to the Council's sensors. It was as if they had disappeared into the dark void of space. "All ships, maintain formation," Trent said. "We're going to make this quick and precise. The Council won't know what hit them." The fleet moved silently through space, slipping past monitoring stations and patrols without raising an alarm. As they traveled, Captain Trent's mind was racing, but his resolve was ironclad. They were heading straight for the heart of the Galactic Council, and this time they would not be stopped. He opened a secure communication channel to the entire fleet. To all crews, this is Captain Trent. We are about to embark on a mission that will determine humanity's future. The Council believes they can trap us, isolate us, but they are wrong. We are more than just a single planet's people. We are a force that will not be silenced or controlled. Our ancestors looked to the stars and saw endless possibilities, and today we fight to claim our right to explore, to expand, and to be free. As the message echoed through the ships, thousands of men and women steeled themselves for what lay ahead. They had trained, they had prepared, and now they were ready to show the galaxy what humanity was capable of. The fleet jumped into hyperspace, disappearing into the darkness. Somewhere deep within the void, the countdown to their arrival at Unity Prime began. The vast darkness of space was still and quiet, stretching endlessly in all directions. But at the edge of the Galactic Council's territory, something unexpected was about to break that silence. The Eternal Resolve and its fleet, cloaked in shadows, emerged from hyperspace. In the distance, the bright, massive shape of Unity Prime came into view, a colossal space station that served as the heart of the Galactic Council's power. It was a city in space, bristling with defensive platforms, surrounded by fleets of patrol ships, and dotted with shimmering lights. On the bridge of the Eternal Resolve, Captain Elias Trent observed the station, his eyes cold and calculating. "There it is," he said quietly, his voice echoing through the silent command center. "The heart of their empire." Commander Lee stood beside him, scanning the tactical display. "It's heavily fortified. If they spot us, we'll be facing the full might of the Council's fleet." "They won't see us," Trent said, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "Not until we want them to." He turned to the communications officer. "Open a secure channel to all ships." The officer nodded, and a few moments later, the fleet's commanders were all listening. "This is it," Trent began, his voice calm but filled with a steely resolve. "Our first strike. The Council thinks they have us under control, that they can keep us caged. Today, we show them they are wrong. We will strike fast, hit them hard, and vanish before they know what happened. We're not here to start a war, but we're not afraid of one, either." The fleet continued its silent approach, moving like shadows through the void, their cloaking systems ensuring that they remained invisible to the Council's sensors. Inside Unity Prime, there was no indication of the approaching danger. The Council was still operating under the assumption that humanity was trapped in its own solar system, powerless and contained. But they had underestimated just how resourceful humanity could be. On board Unity Prime, Counselor Zarkin was in the middle of a meeting, reviewing the latest reports about the new restrictions placed on human starships. He was confident, almost smug, as he discussed the Council's plans to further tighten their control over the galaxy. The room was filled with holographic projections of trade routes, patrol schedules, and resource allocations. It was all very routine, until a flashing alert appeared on one of the displays. "Sir," an aide said, his voice hesitant, "we're detecting some unusual readings near the outer perimeter of the system." Zarkin barely glanced at the screen. "Probably just a malfunction. Send a patrol to check it out." The aide nodded, but as he turned to relay the order, the alarms suddenly blared across Unity Prime. Every display screen lit up with red warning signals, and a voice echoed through the station. "Alert! Multiple unidentified vessels detected approaching Unity Prime. Defensive positions activated." Zarkin's confident expression wavered, his eyes narrowing. "What? That's impossible. Who would dare?" Before he could finish, the windows of the Council chamber lit up with flashes of light as the Eternal Resolve and the rest of the hidden fleet deactivated their cloaks, revealing themselves just outside the station's perimeter. For a moment, there was silence as the Council members stared out at the approaching ships, their sleek black forms illuminated against the dark void. Then, chaos erupted. On the Eternal Resolve, Captain Trent gave the order. All ships, engage. The fleet moved as one, a coordinated storm of firepower and precision. Plasma cannons charged and released, missiles streaked across the blackness, and beams of light pierced the defenses of Unity Prime. The initial strike was devastating, targeting the station's communications arrays and key defensive platforms. The goal wasn't to destroy the station entirely, but to cripple it, to show the Council that humanity was no longer under their control. Direct hit on the main comms array, reported Lieutenant Samuels, her fingers flying over the tactical console. Their long-range communications are down. Good, Trent said, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. They can't call for reinforcements now. Inside Unity Prime, panic was spreading. Ships scrambled to launch, trying to form a defensive perimeter around the station, but they were disorganized, caught off guard by the sudden and unexpected attack. On the command bridge, Counselor Zarkin watched the chaos unfold, his face twisted in anger and disbelief. "How is this possible?" he roared. "How did they get here?" As the first Council ships tried to engage the human fleet, they quickly realized just how outmatched they were. The Eternal Resolve was equipped with advanced shielding and stealth technology, allowing it to move and strike with a speed and precision that the Council's forces had never seen. Council ships exploded one after another, unable to keep up with the relentless assault. "We need to fall back," shouted one of Zarkin's aides, but Zarkin would hear none of it. "No, we will crush them here and now. All ships, focus fire on their lead vessel." Back on the Eternal Resolve, Captain Trent could see the Council forces starting to regroup. "They're trying to form a defensive line," Commander Lee observed. "We should pull back before they can." "No," Trent interrupted. "We're not done yet." He keyed the comms to the rest of the fleet. "Prepare for Phase 2, on my mark." As the Council ships continued their desperate attempts to organize a defense, Trent's fleet began to reposition, forming a tight arc around Unity Prime. The plan was simple but bold: hit them fast, disrupt their response, and vanish before the Council could retaliate. "Mark," Trent shouted. The fleet surged forward, unleashing a second wave of attacks. This time, they targeted the power cores of the station's defensive platforms, causing massive explosions that lit up the darkness of space. Within minutes, the once imposing defenses of Unity Prime were in shambles, and the Council's ships were forced to pull back, their formations collapsing under the pressure. "Sir, we've got them on the run," Lieutenant Samuels reported. "They're retreating toward the inner docks." "Hold position," Trent ordered, his voice steady. "We've made our point. It's time to withdraw." As quickly as the attack had begun, it was over. The Eternal Resolve and its fleet re-engaged their cloaking systems, disappearing from sight. For a few moments, the space around Unity Prime was still, the air filled only with the distant sounds of crackling comms and the faint hum of engines. The station's alarms were still blaring, but there was no sign of the attackers. Inside Unity Prime, Counselor Zarkin sat in stunned silence. He had never seen anything like it. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. "Find them," he hissed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Track them down and destroy them." But it was too late. The human fleet was gone, leaving behind a clear and unmistakable message. Humanity was no longer under the Council's control. They had struck at the heart of the Galactic Council's power, and they had done so with precision, leaving no doubt about their capabilities. Back on the Eternal Resolve, the bridge crew let out a collective sigh of relief. Captain Trent turned to Commander Lee, his expression unreadable. "We've bought ourselves some time, but this is only the beginning. The Council will come after us, and they'll come with everything they have." Lee nodded. "Then we'd better be ready." Trent's eyes narrowed as he stared out into the dark void, where Unity Prime was now just a distant speck. "We've shown them that we can hit them where it hurts. Next time, we'll hit even harder." As the Eternal Resolve and its fleet vanished into the darkness, preparing for their next move. A new chapter was beginning. Humanity was no longer playing by the Council's rules. They were writing their own. And the galaxy would never be the same. On a dusty mining colony at the far reaches of Council space, the air was heavy with the smell of metal and sweat. The inhabitants, a mix of various alien species, toiled under the watchful eyes of armed Council guards. The sun beat down relentlessly, casting harsh shadows across the barren landscape. For years, the miners had lived under the Council's oppressive rule, working long hours with little reward, their spirits crushed under the weight of their overseer's cruelty. Kale, a wiry, scarred alien with skin the color of burnt copper, wiped the sweat from his brow as he leaned against his mining tool. He had been working the mines for almost 2 decades, and he had seen countless rebellions rise and fall, each crushed mercilessly by the Council's forces. Yet today felt different. There was a buzz of excitement in the air, a murmur of hope that he hadn't heard in years. "Did you see it?" whispered a voice nearby. "The humans. They attacked Unity Prime." Cal's ears perked up, and he turned to see a small group of miners huddled together, speaking in low tones. He pushed his way through the crowd, his heart pounding. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. "What did the humans do?" One of the miners, a stocky alien with 4 eyes, glanced around nervously before leaning in. "They attacked the Council's main station, Unity Prime," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Caught them completely off guard. I heard they crippled the station's defenses before vanishing." Cal's eyes widened in disbelief. "That's impossible," he muttered. "No one's ever dared to strike at Unity Prime. How did they even get there without being detected?" The miner shrugged, but there was a spark of excitement in his eyes. "Doesn't matter, does it? They did it. The Council's not as untouchable as they want us to believe." For a moment, Cal stood there, his mind racing. If the rumors were true, it meant the humans had managed to do what no other species had even dared to attempt. They had struck a blow against the Council, and they had survived. Maybe, just maybe, there was hope after all. Meanwhile, back on the Eternal Resolve, Captain Elias Trent stood in the briefing room, a holographic display showing the distant mining colonies scattered across the edge of Council space. The attack on Unity Prime had sent shockwaves through the galaxy, and now the human fleet was on the move, looking for allies who shared their desire for freedom. "We've disrupted their communication network, and the Council is scrambling to regain control," Trent said, addressing his senior officers. "But we can't do this alone. If we're going to take on the Council, we need more than just ships. We need allies, and I think I know where to find them." Commander Lee raised an eyebrow. "The mining colonies?" she asked, glancing at the display. "I thought most of them were under strict Council control." "They are," Trent replied, nodding. "But that doesn't mean the people there are loyal to the Council. They'd been forced to work under brutal conditions for years. If anyone has a reason to fight, it's them. And if the rumors of our attack have reached them, we might have a chance to unite them." Lee's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "It's risky. If the Council gets wind of this, they'll tighten their grip on the colonies. But if we can pull it off..." Trent finished her sentence. "We'll have the manpower and resources we need to stand a real chance. It's a gamble, but it's one worth taking." As the human fleet approached the mining colonies, cloaked under their advanced stealth systems, Trent sent out a series of encrypted signals, hoping to reach someone. Anyone who might be willing to listen. The fleet hovered in orbit, invisible to the Council's patrols, waiting for a response. Hours passed, and just when it seemed like they might be met with silence, a single, crackling transmission came through. "This is Cal of Ore Station 7. Who are you, and why are you here?" Trent's heart skipped a beat. It was a small breakthrough, but it was something. He activated the communication channel, his voice calm and steady. "This is Captain Elias Trent of the Earth Fleet. We're here to make an offer. We've seen how the Council treats your people, and we're willing to help you fight back." There was a pause on the other end, And then a harsh, skeptical laugh. "Fight back. Against the Council. You must be out of your mind," Kel replied. "They'll crush us before we even get the chance to resist." "Maybe," Trent said, his tone unwavering. "But we just hit Unity Prime, and we're still here. The Council isn't invincible, and you don't have to live under their boot forever. We're willing to give you the means to fight, but you have to be willing to stand with us." Cale fell silent, and Trent could almost hear the gears turning in his head. Finally, Cale spoke, his voice softer but filled with a newfound determination. "You actually did it, didn't you? You attacked Unity Prime." "We did," Trent confirmed. "And we're not stopping there. We've come to offer you a chance to join us. We want to take down the Council, and we need people who have the courage to fight. Are you in?" The next day, in a dimly lit warehouse on Ore Station 7, Cale stood before a gathering of miners and workers. The air was thick with tension, but there was also a sense of anticipation, like a storm waiting to break. He had told them everything about the humans, their attack on Unity Prime, and the offer they had made. Now it was time to see if anyone was willing to take the risk. "We've been living under the Council's rule for too long," Cale said, his voice echoing through the room. "They've treated us like expendable labor, keeping us in line with threats and violence. But if the humans can fight back, why can't we?" A murmur ran through the crowd, some nodding in agreement, others exchanging nervous glances. One of the older miners, a grizzled veteran with a cybernetic arm, stepped forward. "And what if the Council comes after us?" he asked. "What then?" Cale met his gaze, his expression hard. "Then we fight. We've been scared of them for so long that we've forgotten how to hope. But the humans are showing us that there's a way out. We just have to be brave enough to take it." The room fell silent, and for a moment, it seemed like no one would speak. Then, slowly, a hand rose from the back of the room. "I'm in," said a young alien, her eyes fierce. "I'm tired of being treated like I don't matter." Another hand went up, then another, and soon the room was filled with voices, each one louder than the last. "I'm in. We're with you. Let's show the Council what it means to fight back." Cal's heart swelled with pride as he looked out at the crowd. This was it, the beginning of something bigger than any of them had dared to dream. "Then it's settled," he said, raising his hand to quiet the room. "We join forces with the humans, and together we tear the Council's empire apart, piece by piece." Back on the Eternal Resolve, Captain Trent watched as dozens of small ships from the mining colonies began to emerge, forming up alongside his fleet. It was a ragtag force, nothing like the polished, powerful vessels of the Earth fleet, but it was a start. Commander Lee stood beside him, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. "Looks like we've got ourselves some allies," she said. Trent nodded, his eyes gleaming with determination. "And it's only the beginning. The Council thinks they can control us with fear, but they're about to learn what happens when you push people too far." As the newly formed alliance prepared to jump to their next destination, a sense of hope spread through the fleet. They were no longer alone in this fight. Humanity had found allies in the shadows, and together they would be a force that the Council could not ignore. The next phase of their plan was set in motion, and the galaxy was about to see just how powerful Unity could be. The Galactic Council headquarters on Unity Prime was a scene of frantic activity. The once pristine and orderly station now buzzed with urgency, alarms flashing red across the control panels. Inside the command center, Counselor Zarkin stood amidst a sea of officers, each scrambling to respond to the reports flooding in from across the galaxy. The news was grim. Not only had the humans launched a brazen attack on Unity Prime, but whispers of rebellion were now spreading to the outer colonies. How did this happen? Zarkin snapped, his reptilian eyes blazing with fury. "I want answers. How did they get past our defenses without detection?" An aide nervously approached, clutching a datapad. "Sir, we've confirmed that the human fleet is using some form of advanced cloaking technology. It's unlike anything we've seen before. Our systems can't track them." Zarkin slammed his fist onto the console, making nearby officers flinch. "I don't care how advanced their technology is. They are just humans. Primitive, reckless. Mobilize the fleet. I want every available ship to hunt them down and destroy them." The aide hesitated, glancing at the other officers before continuing. "There's more, Counselor. We're receiving reports from the mining colonies. It seems there are uprisings. Some of the miners are openly defying our forces, and they've been seen joining with the human fleet." For a moment, Zarkin just stared, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Impossible," he hissed. "The miners wouldn't dare. They know what will happen if they resist." But the reports didn't lie. All across the Council's territories, colonies that had been silent and subdued for years were starting to rise, emboldened by the humans' defiance. What began as a single act of rebellion was turning into a full-blown movement, and Zarkin could feel the Council's grip on power slipping. "Send a message to all Council fleets," Zarkin growled, his voice low and menacing. "Crush these uprisings. Make an example of them. And find those humans. I want them dead." The Eternal Resolve drifted silently through space, its engines humming softly as it navigated the dark void. Inside the ship's command center, Captain Elias Trent stood by the holo display, reviewing the latest intelligence. Commander Lee entered, her expression grim. "Reports are coming in from all over," she said, handing Trent a tablet. "The Council's fleets are mobilizing. They're planning a full-scale counterattack against the colonies. They want to stamp out any sign of rebellion before it spreads." Trent's jaw tightened as he scanned the reports. "We expected this," he said. "The Council can't afford to lose control. They're going to hit back hard, and they're going to try to scare everyone back into submission." "But it's different this time," Lee said, her eyes meeting his. "The colonies aren't backing down. They're willing to fight, and they're looking to us for support." Trent nodded, his mind racing. "Then we give them what they need." He turned to the communication officer. "Send a message to the fleet. We're splitting into task forces. We need to protect those colonies, or everything we've built so far will fall apart." The officer quickly relayed the orders, and across the Eternal Resolve, the crew prepared for action. The plan was simple but risky. Smaller groups of ships would jump to different hotspots, providing support to the colonies and striking at the Council's forces wherever they could. It was a strategy that required coordination and speed, but if it worked, it would force the Council to spread their forces thin, giving the rebels a fighting chance. On a dusty outpost on the planet Tarvik 9, the air was thick with tension. The colony was a small one, known for its mining facilities, and not much else. But today, it had become the front line in a brewing conflict. Kale, the rebellious miner who had first reached out to the humans, stood at the barricades, looking out over the horizon. He could see the distant glint of the Council's ships approaching, their silhouettes dark against the orange sky. "We've got incoming," shouted one of the lookout scouts, his voice carrying over the din of preparations. "Council dropships, about a dozen of them." Kel's heart pounded as he tightened his grip on his weapon. They had barricaded the main entrance to the colony, fortified their positions as best they could, but he knew they were outgunned. "Hold your ground," he yelled, trying to keep his voice steady. "They'll try to scare us, but we stand and fight." The Council dropships descended, their engines roaring as they approached. A voice echoed from the loudspeakers on one of the ships, cold and commanding. "This is the Galactic Council. Surrender now, and you will be spared. Resist, and you will face the full force of our wrath." Kale looked around at the faces of his fellow miners. Some were scared, others defiant, but none of them moved. They had been pushed too far, and they were done running. "We're not surrendering," Kale muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "Not today." Suddenly, the sky above them lit up with flashes of light as several sleek, black ships dropped out of the clouds. The Shadowlance, a ship from the human fleet, had arrived, accompanied by a few smaller fighters. The Council forces hesitated, caught off guard by the sudden appearance of these unexpected allies. "This is Captain Mallory of the Shadowlands," a voice said over the colony's comms. "We're here to help. All units, engage the Council dropships." The colony erupted into chaos as the battle began. Plasma bolts crisscrossed the sky, explosions echoing across the landscape. The Council forces were well armed and disciplined, but they hadn't expected to face resistance from both the colony and the human ships. As the Shadowlands unleashed a barrage of firepower, the dropships were forced to pull back, regrouping to avoid being cut down. Kale couldn't help but grin as he saw the Council forces faltering. For once, they were the ones on the defensive. "Keep pushing," he shouted. "We've got them on the ropes." Back on Unity Prime, Counselor Zarkin watched the reports with growing frustration. "How are a few human ships holding back our forces?" he demanded, his eyes blazing. "They should have been wiped out by now." One of the officers hesitated, glancing nervously at the screen. "The humans are coordinating with the colony, sir. They're using hit-and-run tactics, and our fleets are having trouble pinning them down. Every time we try to regroup, they strike at another colony." Zarkin's scales shimmered as he clenched his fists. "Then we're going to change the rules of this game. Deploy the Leviathan." The room went silent, and the officers exchanged uneasy glances. The Leviathan was one of the Council's most powerful warships, a massive dreadnought equipped with enough firepower to level entire cities. It was rarely used, a symbol of the Council's overwhelming might, and its deployment sent a clear message: complete and total annihilation. "Are you sure, sir?" one of the officers asked, his voice cautious. "The Leviathan's presence could provoke." "I don't care," Zarkin interrupted, his voice cold. "If these humans and their allies want to fight, then we'll show them what it means to face the true power of the Council." On the Eternal Resolve, Captain Trent received the latest reports and felt a chill run down his spine. "They're sending the Leviathan," Commander Lee said, her tone grim. "It's heading straight for Tarvik 9. Trent's eyes narrowed. "They're going to make an example of it," he said, his mind racing. "They want to show the galaxy what happens when you defy them." Commander Lee looked at him, her expression serious. "If they deploy the Leviathan, it could wipe out everything on that planet. We have to stop it." "We will," Trent said, his voice hard. "Send a message to the fleet. All ships, converge on Tarvik 9. We're not letting them destroy that colony." As the order was given, the human fleet began to change course, their engines roaring to life as they sped toward Tarvik 9. They were outnumbered, and they were facing one of the most powerful warships in the galaxy. But they had no intention of backing down. "Prepare for battle," Trent said, his eyes fixed on the distant stars. "We're about to show the Council what happens when they underestimate humanity." The countdown began as the Eternal Resolve and its allies raced to intercept the Leviathan, knowing that the fate of Tarvik 9, and perhaps the entire rebellion, hung in the balance. The Eternal Resolve and its allied fleet hurtled through hyperspace, the vast emptiness around them streaking into brilliant lines of light. Inside the ship, Captain Elias Trent stood on the bridge, his face set with determination. Every screen, every console, was alive with data, tracking the movement of the Council's dreaded warship, the Leviathan. It was a behemoth, unlike anything the human fleet had faced before, and it was on a direct course for Tarvik 9. "They're trying to crush the rebellion before it even begins," Commander Lee said, her eyes scanning the tactical readouts. "If the Leviathan gets there, it'll be a massacre." Trent nodded, his jaw clenched. "That's why we have to intercept it. We can't let them make an example out of Tarvik 9. He turned to the communication officer. "Send a message to all ships. We engage as soon as we drop out of hyperspace. No holding back." On the surface of Tarvik 9, Kale and his fellow rebels were hastily fortifying their positions. The news had spread like wildfire. The Council was sending its most powerful ship, and everyone knew what that meant. If the Leviathan arrived, there would be no negotiation, no mercy, just destruction. Cale stood on a makeshift watchtower, staring up at the sky. He had seen the power of the Council's forces before, but never something like this. "They want to scare us," he muttered to himself. "They want us to run." Behind him, a young rebel approached, his face pale. "Are we really going to try to fight that thing?" he asked, his voice shaking. Cale turned, his eyes hard. "We are, because if we don't, then everything we've been fighting for, everything we've lost, will be for nothing." He placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "We're not alone. The humans are coming. And if they're willing to stand with us, then we can't back down." Just then, the sky above Tarvik 9 began to shimmer, and a series of bright flashes lit up the horizon. The human fleet had arrived. The Eternal Resolve and its allied ships dropped out of hyperspace, emerging into the dark void near Tarvik 9. Ahead of them, the Leviathan loomed, its dark hull bristling with weapons, and dozens of smaller Council ships moved alongside it, forming a protective screen. It was a formidable sight, a wall of firepower designed to intimidate and annihilate. "Council forces have detected us," said Lieutenant Samuels, her voice tense. "They're moving into formation." Trent's eyes narrowed as he studied the display. "Then let's not keep them waiting. All ships, prepare to engage. Prioritize their escorts, break their lines, and force them to spread out." The human fleet surged forward, engines roaring, and within moments, the battle had begun. Plasma bolts and missile trails streaked through space, lighting up the darkness. The Council ships opened fire, their weapons hammering the human vessels with relentless precision. But the humans had learned from their earlier skirmishes. They weaved through the barrage, using their smaller, more agile ships to dart in and out of the Council's defenses, disrupting their formations. "Send the Shadowlance and its squadron to flank their left," Trent ordered. "Draw their fire away from the main fleet." Commander Lee glanced at the tactical display, watching as the smaller human ships executed the maneuver. "They're taking the bait," she said. "The Council forces are splitting up." "Good," said Trent. "Now let's see if we can get their attention." Inside the Leviathan, the atmosphere was cold and calm, the crew operating with machine-like efficiency. On the command deck, Admiral Tavros, a veteran of countless battles, watched the tactical displays with a steely gaze. He had been chosen to lead this mission because of his ruthless reputation, and he intended to live up to it. "They think they can stop us," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Let them try. Prepare the main cannon." As the order was given, the Leviathan's massive central cannon began to power up, energy crackling along its length. It was a weapon capable of obliterating entire ships with a single shot, and now it was aimed directly at the Eternal Resolve. Back on the Eternal Resolve, alarms blared as the sensors detected the power surge. "Captain, the Leviathan is charging its main weapon," warned Samuels. "They're targeting us." Trent's mind raced. If the Leviathan fired, there was a good chance his ship wouldn't survive the blast. But he couldn't back down now. "Bring us around," he ordered. "Keep our forward shields up and prepare to intercept." The Eternal Resolve turned, its powerful engines straining as it moved to face the oncoming threat. The crew braced themselves, fingers gripping consoles, eyes locked on the displays. Trent could feel the tension rising, the air thick with anticipation. The Leviathan's cannon fired, a massive beam of energy lancing across space, searing through the darkness. The Eternal Resolve's shields flared brilliantly, absorbing the brunt of the attack, but the ship shuddered under the impact, metal groaning as parts of the hull buckled. "We've lost secondary shields on the starboard side," shouted an officer, sparks flying from his console. "Damage teams are responding. But we can't take another hit like that." Trent gritted his teeth. "We won't have to," he said. "Prepare to launch the disruptor drones." The Eternal Resolve launched a swarm of small, agile drones, each equipped with a disruptor field designed to interfere with enemy targeting systems. The drones darted across the battlefield, weaving through the council ships, creating chaos and confusion. Admiral Tavros frowned as his tactical displays flickered, the drones scrambling the Leviathan systems. "What is this? Where did they get this technology?" he muttered, frustration creeping into his voice. While the Leviathan struggled to regain control, the human fleet pressed their advantage. Smaller ships slipped past the Council's lines, targeting the escort ships with surgical precision. One by one, the Council's smaller vessels were disabled or destroyed, and the once imposing formation began to fray. On the surface of Tarvik 9, Kale and the other rebels watched the battle unfolding above them, their eyes wide with awe. "They're actually doing it," whispered the young rebel beside him. "They're pushing them back." Cal's heart pounded as he raised his fist. "We're not done yet," he shouted. "Get those anti-air cannons ready. If any Council ships make it through, we'll be here to greet them." The Council had sent ground forces to Tarvik 9, dropships filled with soldiers who had expected an easy victory. But as they approached, they were met with a wall of fire from the rebels, forcing them to retreat and regroup. Cal could see the tide turning, and for the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't dared to hope for: victory. On the Leviathan, Admiral Tavros' frustration had boiled over into rage. "They're making fools of us," he spat. "Prepare the secondary batteries and sweep them from the sky." But before he could issue the command, a series of explosions rocked the Leviathan's hull. The Shadowlance and its squadron had managed to breach the warship's defenses, planting charges along its vulnerable sections. The resulting blast sent shockwaves through the massive vessel, forcing it to veer off course. "Direct hit on the Leviathan's engines," reported Commander Lee, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "They're losing control." Trent seized the moment. "All ships, focus fire on the Leviathan. We need to take it out now." The human fleet unleashed everything they had, a storm of plasma, missiles, and railgun rounds tearing into the Leviathan. The massive ship shields buckled and collapsed, and its armor was torn apart by the relentless assault. Inside, Admiral Tavros staggered as the command deck shook, alarms blaring all around him. "We can't hold, sir," a crew member shouted, panic in his voice. "The hull is breaching." Tavros glared at the display, his mind reeling. "Fall back," he muttered, his voice hollow. "Fall back." As the Leviathan began to retreat, the human fleet pressed forward, ensuring it couldn't regroup. The once mighty warship limped away, its engines flickering, leaving behind a field of wreckage and debris. The Council's forces were in disarray, their lines shattered, their morale broken. On the bridge of the Eternal Resolve, cheers erupted as the Leviathan fled. Trent allowed himself a moment to breathe, his shoulders relaxing as he took in the sight of the battered but victorious fleet. "We did it," he said quietly, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Commander Lee nodded, her eyes shining. "We've shown them that we're not afraid, and we've given the colonies a reason to hope." The battle for Tarvik 9 had been won, but the war was far from over. Across the galaxy, word of the Leviathan's retreat spread quickly, reaching colonies and outposts that had once believed the Council's power to be unbreakable. Now, they saw a chance, a spark that had been lit by a few bold humans and their allies, willing to stand against the tide. As Captain Trent looked out at the stars, he knew the road ahead would be long and difficult. But for the first time, he could see the possibility of a future where the galaxy was no longer ruled by fear. "We've turned the tide," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "Now, it's time to finish what we started." The Leviathan's defeat sent shockwaves throughout the Galactic Council's territories. For decades, the Council had maintained an iron grip, using their overwhelming firepower and fear to keep the galaxy in line. But now, that grip was weakening. Word of the Leviathan's retreat spread like wildfire, igniting hope in places where there had been none for years. On distant colonies, in hidden outposts, and even within Council-controlled worlds, people began to whisper, "If the humans can fight back, so can we." But while the Council's control was slipping, They were far from defeated. Inside Unity Prime, Counselor Zarkin's rage had only grown. The room was filled with the hum of frantic activity, officers and aides scrambling to manage the crisis. Zarkin stood in the center, his eyes dark with fury, staring at the chaotic reports streaming in from across the galaxy. "They're making us look weak," he snarled, his claws tapping impatiently on the arm of his chair. "The entire galaxy is watching, and they're beginning to think they can defy us." An officer stepped forward, his face pale. "Sir, the human fleet has regrouped, and they've allied with several rebel factions. Our intelligence suggests they're planning a major offensive." Zarkin's eyes narrowed. "Where?" "Citadel Prime," the officer replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're going to attack the heart of our military operations. If they succeed, it will cripple our ability to respond across the galaxy." Zarkin's lips curled into a snarl. "Then we make our stand there. Send out the order. I want every available ship, every soldier, every weapon we have to defend Citadel Prime. If the humans want to challenge us, we'll crush them once and for all." The Eternal Resolve hung in orbit around a distant moon. The human fleet gathered in tight formation. On board, Captain Elias Trent stood in the war room, surrounded by holographic displays showing the latest intelligence on the Council's defenses. Commander Lee, Kale, and several other Allied leaders were there as well, all focused on the plan for what would be their most critical mission yet. "This is it," Trent began, looking around at the faces of those gathered. "We've managed to push them back, but if we're going to break their control, we need to strike at the core of their power. Citadel Prime is the key. It's where they control their fleets, their communications, and their supply lines. If we take it, the rest of their forces will be left scrambling." Kale nodded, his expression resolute. "But it won't be easy. They know we're coming, and they'll throw everything they have at us. We don't need to destroy them," Lee said, leaning over the tactical map. "We just need to take down their command structure. If we can disrupt their coordination, their fleets will fall apart." Trent pointed to several key points on the holographic map. "We'll divide into 3 groups. Group 1 will draw their fleet away from the station, forcing them to spread their defenses. Group 2 will focus on disabling their communication arrays, cutting them off from reinforcements. And Group 3, he paused, looking at the Allied leaders. Group 3 will be our strike force. We're going straight for the command center. We get in, take control, and shut them down." The fleet jumped to hyperspace, emerging at the edge of Citadel Prime's system. The sight that greeted them was daunting. The Council had gathered every ship they could muster, battlecruisers, destroyers, and smaller patrol craft, all forming a defensive ring around the planet. It was a fortress designed to repel any assault. On board the Eternal Resolve, Trent stood on the bridge, his eyes fixed on the tactical displays. "They've pulled back their fleets from across the galaxy," he observed. "This is everything they've got. Then we'll make sure it's the last fleet they ever gather," Kale said, a fierce glint in his eyes. "Signal all ships," Trent ordered. "Phase 1. Commence." Group 1 moved first, a vanguard of smaller, faster ships darting toward the edges of the Council's formation. They fired their weapons, targeting the outer defenses and drawing the Council's fleet away. Plasma bolts lit up the darkness as the battle began, a chaotic dance of fire and maneuvering as the two sides clashed. On Citadel Prime, Admiral Tavros, now leading the Council's defense after his failure with the Leviathan, watched the displays with a scowl. "They're trying to flank us," he growled. "Don't let them scatter our forces. Keep the formation tight." But as Group 1 continued to press, Group 2 moved in under the cover of the distraction, slipping past the front lines and heading straight for the planet's orbital communications platforms. The Council's defensive platforms lit up, but the humans and their allies responded with precision strikes, targeting power generators and weapon systems. "We're taking heavy fire, but we're holding," said Captain Mallory from the Shadowlands. "We've reached the comms array." "Disable it," Trent ordered. "Cut them off." As Group 2 unleashed a barrage of missiles, explosions rippled across the communication towers, silencing the Council's long-range systems. Inside Citadel Prime, the command center's screens flickered and went dark, causing a wave of confusion among the officers. "We're losing contact with the outer fleets," a technician shouted, frantically typing at his console. "I can't reach any of our units." With the Council's coordination in disarray, it was time for Group 3 to make their move. The Eternal Resolve led the charge, flanked by a mix of human and rebel ships. They punched through the Council's weakened lines, heading straight for the command center on the surface of Citadel Prime. "Prepare the drop teams," Trent said, strapping on his gear. "We're going in." Kale joined him, checking his weapons. "You're really coming down there with us?" he asked, a hint of surprise in his voice. Trent nodded. "This isn't just about winning a battle. We need to show the Council and the galaxy that we're not afraid to stand up to them." Besides, he added with a grim smile, "I want to see the look on Zarkin's face when we bring this place down." The dropships raced toward the surface, dodging anti-air fire as they descended through the atmosphere. Explosions burst around them, shaking the hulls, but the pilots pressed on, weaving through the chaos. As they touched down, the hatches opened, and Trent, Kale, and a team of heavily armed soldiers poured out, heading straight for the command center. Inside, Counselor Zarkin watched the incoming forces on the monitors, his hands trembling with rage. "They dare to come here, to the heart of our empire." He spat. "I will not be humiliated by these humans." "Sir, they're already inside the perimeter," an officer said, his voice panicked. "They're heading for the main control room." Zarkin's eyes narrowed, and he turned to Admiral Tavros. "Deploy every last soldier. I want them crushed." The battle on the surface was brutal. Council troops, clad in heavy armor and wielding plasma rifles, clashed with the human and rebel forces in the narrow streets and corridors of Citadel Prime. The air was filled with the sounds of gunfire, explosions, and the shouts of commanders directing their squads. Trent led his team through the chaos, his eyes focused on the central spire of the command center. "We're almost there," he shouted over the comms. "Hold the line." As they approached the entrance, they were met by a wave of Council soldiers, blocking their path. But Kale and his rebels fought with a ferocity that surprised even the humans. They had lived under the Council's oppression for too long, and now they were determined to make every moment count. "We've got your back, Captain," Kale yelled, charging forward with his squad. "Go. Finish this." Trent and his team pushed through, blasting their way into the command center. They fought their way up to the control room, where Zarkin and Tavros waited, a contingent of elite guards at their side. "It's over, Zarkin," Trent said, leveling his rifle at the counselor. "Your fleets are scattered, your communications are down, and we're not leaving until this station is under our control." Zarkin's face twisted into a sneer. "You think this changes anything? Even if you win here, you're just one species. The Council will rebuild. You can't possibly think you can take on the entire galaxy." Trent stepped forward, his voice calm but resolute. "We're not alone. We've shown the galaxy that there's a choice, one you tried to take from us. And if there's one thing humans know how to do, it's fight for their freedom." Tavros moved to draw his weapon, but Kale was faster, tackling him to the ground. The room erupted into a brief, fierce struggle, but the Council's guards were outnumbered and overpowered. Zarkin, realizing he was beaten, sank to his knees, his expression blank with disbelief. "This isn't over," he whispered. "It will never be over." Trent lowered his weapon, staring down at the fallen counselor. "Maybe not. But today, we win." As the Eternal Resolve's crew took control of Citadel Prime's systems, a message was broadcast across the galaxy. The image of Captain Elias Trent appeared on screens in distant colonies, on space stations, and on Council-controlled worlds. "To all who can hear me," he began, his voice echoing through the void, "we stand today as proof that no power, no matter how great, can keep people from fighting for their freedom. We have taken Citadel Prime, and we will not stop until every species in this galaxy has the right to choose its own future. The Council's reign of fear is over. If you're ready to join us, know that we stand with you. The message resonated, spreading hope to corners of the galaxy that had long been dark. The battle was far from over, but today the galaxy had witnessed the beginning of the end for the Galactic Council's tyranny. Humanity and their allies had made their stand, and they had won.